大家好, 안녕, hello, I am the Dark Fae, and welcome back to The Right Way. So in the last video, I talked a bit about world building in general and kind of how to get started. And the exercise that I left you with was to come up with 5 kind of overarching story ideas. So now in this video, what we're going to talk about is creating your main character. And arguably, your main character is it is one of the most important elements of writing a story or building a world, because your main character is kind of the driving force behind the story. The reader is going to see how is going to kind of interact with the world through your main character, and it's your main character's conflicts and drives and emotions and all that kind of are behind your story. So the way that I usually start is kind of just with the basics. Name, age, what they look like, and it can go as simple as dark hair, short, wears simple t-shirts and jeans, to something much more in-depth, their name, their age, their nationality, their exact height, 5'6", how much they weigh, what they like to wear, how much makeup they wear, if they wear makeup, do they have any defining marks, any scars, any tattoos, do they wear any kind of jewelry. Physical descriptions can go a long way in kind of describing your character's personality. Someone who is kind of more introverted and aloof might wear darker clothes. They might not really care too much about their appearance, have very simple looks, whereas someone who is super bright and bubbly might wear a lot of bright colors, might have their hair in a fun hairstyle, might wear fun accessories kind of. So physical appearance can do a lot to kind of define what your character is about. And to kind of determine what your character is about, you kind of have to first place them into this beginning story or beginning world that you are making, and kind of decide what is driving them, why they are your main character, and sort of what makes them tick. So you're kind of creating a person, and a person is not just a one-dimensional thing with just very simple bats, like her hair is blue, her eyes are brown, she likes ice cream. A person is much more complex than that. So what I've found is to kind of make a main character, you start with kind of one conflict or emotion or value, and you start asking questions, and then you answer those questions with more questions, and it eventually kind of becomes a conversation with yourself, because what writer doesn't talk to themselves? But it kind of becomes a conversation, or this back and forth, where these answers to these questions develop more questions, which kind of lets you delve deeper and deeper into your character. So the tricky part, I would say, is coming up with your first main value, and that might come from what your story or world is about. If you've got a world that's kind of post-apocalyptic and is kind of very harsh, you might have a girl or guy or main character who is very determined and resourceful and kind of fights to survive. Or if you have something a little bit more kind of more fantasy-esque, you might have someone who's just starting to learn about their magic powers and wants to discover where they came from, something like that. So it's important to determine things like motives and desires and dislikes and likes and stuff like that, but doing it in a more detailed fashion. I found that this kind of way of asking questions and answering with more questions was very helpful with helping my players create D&D characters. I've done it a lot with my own characters in my story. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about kind of how I get started with it. Usually I have the premise for a story. I'll use my Exorcist story, for example, because I feel like she's a very strong character that I can kind of delve into a lot. So the premise, like basically from Exercise 1, the premise that I came up for this story was basically the story of an exorcist who can see ghosts, but who is most haunted by the ghost of someone she accidentally murdered. And basically, she has to live with the guilt of that and being reminded of it every day because he is possessing her. Or she let him possess her to deal with that guilt. So I created this character. I decided she was going to be female. She's 3/4 Chinese, because Chinese, and she has dark hair with like purple at the tips of it, kind of short like mine. Promise she's not me, but at the time did kind of put a lot of myself into her. But anyways, and she is a student at I think I call it Steins Academy, who left for a year and then came back to her hometown. And so to start off with like the most basic of questions. There's a lot you can choose from. For example, like, why is she in this place? So like whatever your starting place is, like your city, her hometown, or whatever setting, like why are they there? And then my answer was she's there because this is her hometown. She's a student and she's coming back kind of after a year away. And so that kind of opens the floodgates to any other questions. So I could pick any of those answers and kind of start rolling with it. So for example, she's a student. Then what school does she go to? She goes to Steins Academy. Well, what does she study at Steins Academy? She studies literature and art. What year is she at this academy? She is I think I said junior. She's a third year, which makes her this age, which makes her blah, 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 blah. And so once I've gotten that's kind of where she is now, I can start establishing a timeline of things that happened in her past that might have led her to this. Or, so that's kind of one direction to go in. But yeah, basically, if you come up with a list of questions that you could ask yourself to create a character, basically, if you can come up with a list of questions about your character, of like where they are, or like what they're doing, what they want to do, and then just keep asking kind of why or how, then it kind of just starts to build and build and build until you have a character that is very complex with room for character development, that you can really sink your teeth into. So I guess I can give you some more examples kind of just as an exercise. So I had the question of why is she here? So now taking another part, because she left for a year and came back. Why did she leave for a year? Something bad happened where she ended up accidentally killing someone, so she left. So now I can go in either direction. If I go, she left, okay, well, where did she go? What did she do? What made her come back? Those are all questions that kind of start to build a backstory for this character. If I latch on to the part of she killed someone, well, then that's kind of seems to be the main conflict, and that one I can really expand on, like with how long ago did this happen? Where did it happen? Setting, this happened like by a school. Who was the person that she killed. It was a student, someone who was a student at the time, accidentally. And then it's kind of goes into like, well, how did it happen? What were their circumstances? And it just keeps kind of building and building and building. And this is also very helpful in kind of creating the backstory for not only your character, but for your story as well, since your story is probably going to revolve around this character. So then you have elements of the character's backstory that kind of bleed into the main story, and that kind of drive what happens to this character and why. Don't know if this was very clear, but that's kind of what I do. Just so kind of just like a recap. This just reminded me of like when we were doing book reports in elementary school, and they were like and they're like, the outline of a book report is you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, then you tell them what you told them. So now I'm going to tell you what I told you. Okay, so basically you start off with kind of the basics of a character, of what kind of person you want your character to be, like gender, age, height, physical descriptions, and all of that. Name is very important. I have the most trouble with names because I always want them to be really unique. Name. So start off with a physical description and then figure out kind of why or how they fit into your overarching story idea and kind of like what their main conflict is. And then you start asking questions about your character. It could be start off with something simple as like, what is something that they like and then something they dislike. And then you start asking questions like why and how, and eventually you kind of start to snowball and lead to more in-depth things like what is their main driving purpose, like what are some of their desires, what are some of the things that they hate, or even questions like how would they act in a certain situation. And that kind of helps to determine their properties instead of saying, oh, they're loyal, they're pretty, they have a temper. Instead of kind of like listing out those facts, well, list them out and then give them reasons behind why they're like that. Give them like a past story as to maybe how they became that way. And that eventually starts to build up your character's backstory, and that backstory can kind of serve as a driving force or like the driving force or motivation or kind of the tone for what your story can evolve into. And you can always take bits of that backstory and put it into your story to kind of make your character less just linear, like less of a past, present, future, and more of like a complex character who has a past and that affects their future or their present. And so you really want to be able to kind of intertwine all of these details. It is kind of difficult, and I would say that you don't have to necessarily come up with all of these details right away. Sometimes these details develop as you're writing or as you're world building, and that's definitely okay to like add things in later, or maybe you'll go back and say, oh no, this doesn't quite fit, and you can change or tweak the character as necessary. So now for your writing or world building exercise, last time I had you come up with 5 different story arcs, and so I want you to pick 2, your favorite 2, or maybe your least favorite 2, whichever 2 you want, and come up with main characters for those, kind of using the process that I described, or you can also obviously come up with your own process, but come up with a main character for each of those 2 story arcs or ideas, and see kind of how in depth you can go. Like, see like just how much, like try to add as much detail as possible and go beyond kind of just like the simple bullet points and start kind of writing out the whys and the hows and the backstory of them. So let me know down in the comments below like what your story arc is and what character you made for them. I'm really interested to see what people come up with. And you can always, of course, come up with more than one main character for a story arc and kind of see which one you like better, which one fits better, or you could even, okay, I'm getting a little too into it, but have like 2 main characters in a story arc and then they eventually kind of meet in the middle. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope this helps with making main characters. And I will be back again with probably, I think next time would be storyboarding. I think it's probably the next one. But yeah, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I'll see you next time. Bye.